What a powerful series of movies. So, good evening, audience, and thank you for joining us tonight and attending our post-film roundtable discussion. As Eileen said, I'm Sara Morrissey, Director of Public Affairs and Industry Communications at Travel Oregon. The 2020 wildfire season has been unlike anything we've ever seen in Oregon. High-powered winds and multiple fires devastated communities and public lands across the state. Over 1 million acres have burned, and approximately 2,000 Oregonians continue to be displaced by these fires. Unfortunately, we know that every year, most wildfires in Oregon are caused by humans. So we thought it would be timely to host a roundtable discussion focused on fire bans and speak to individuals who have experience with this within Oregon as well as outside the state. I'll quickly introduce who's at the table with me before we start our discussion. So first, I'd like to introduce Kristin Babbs. She's the president and CEO of the Keep Oregon Green Association. In this position, she develops partnerships and coordinates activities to help Oregon's residents and tourists understand their role and responsibility in the prevention of human-caused wildfires. Thanks for being here, Kristin. We also have Jo Niehaus. She is the marketing strategist and spokesperson for the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. Thank you for joining us tonight, Jo. And finally, we're joined by Calum Matthews, Director of Destination Development with Tourism Vancouver Island. For those of you who are not familiar with Vancouver Island, it's located in the Pacific Ocean and is a part of the Canadian province of British Columbia. It is a beautiful part of Canada. I highly recommend you visit when it's appropriate to do so. At Tourism Vancouver Island, Calum is responsible for destination development, industry training, emergency preparedness, and research initiatives. Thanks for joining us. And I'd like to start the discussion by handing it over to Kristin with Keep Oregon Green to ask her to provide us with an overview of how many human-caused wildfires are in Oregon each year and to provide some context around the issue at hand. Kristin?
Yeah, so on average, people are responsible for about 2/3 of the wildfires in Oregon. And that percentage can fluctuate from year to year depending on the fire environment. So say if we have a really wet spring, or if we see shots of rain throughout the summer, or maybe we have an early season-ending rain event in the fall like last year, that can have an effect on whether an accidental spark gets traction or not. When we do see increases in human-caused fires, it's typically tied to drought conditions around the state, especially when areas are experiencing hotter, drier conditions earlier in the spring than normal, and then even extending late into the fall. So a bigger window of opportunity, if you will, for accidental fires to get started.
And Kristin, what are the typical causes of those fires?
Well, debris burning is number one. It's our top culprit. And by law, people are required to set up their burn pile properly. They need to stay with it at all times, and they have to put it out completely with water after they're done. And unfortunately, folks miss one or all three of those simple steps, and then we have an escape debris burn. And then number two would be equipment use. And this would include vehicles, lawnmowers, weed eaters, chainsaws, basically any power-driven machinery that can get hot or overheated and make contact with dry grasses and vegetation, equipment that can cast carbon sparks, or even just the simple spinning of a metal blade that strikes a rock and can spark a fire. And then third leading cause on our list is campfires. People light them at the wrong time or the wrong place. But more often they're not fully extinguished. And this past summer, honestly, morning campfires were really a big issue. People would light a campfire in the morning and then not put it out completely or even at all. Sometimes they just leave it burning and then leave for their day's activities. So as the temperatures rise through the day and a still burning unattended campfire is definitely a recipe for disaster.
Thanks. And with that, with those wildfires and just the cause of some of those fires in Oregon, what typically prompts a fire ban? How is that determined? Who's making those decisions?
So you're going to have various state and federal agencies and local fire departments making that call as to whether they want to initiate a ban in their area or not. A fire ban might look different for residents in an urban setting like Portland versus a rural or even a forested area. So usually, fire officials are looking to the fire danger levels They're having conversations with their agency partners as a gauge, and then they start placing restrictions on those common activities that can start a fire. So for example, like at high or extreme fire danger, campfires might no longer be allowed in dispersed wilderness sites. You could only use portable stoves with liquefied fuels at that time, but then maybe campfires could still be allowed in those existing manicured campsites, if you will, with established and approved metal fire grates. So restricting use and reining in the risk is usually the first step, but other factors that can influence an all-out ban might be the high number of large wildfires that are already burning on the landscape, and whether there are enough resources available in their local area or even in the state to put a fire out. So the suppression resources, those things factor into determining the need to ban fires or even to close entire forests, just like we did this past Labor Day.
Thanks for that. And with that, I'm going to move over to Joe and talk about the fire ban that was instituted at all Oregon state parks in September, and just ask what led to this decision at state parks.
Thanks, Sara. So state parks periodically issue burn bans during the height of fire season, which can range from any time in the summer clear into until the rains begin in the fall, up until right now, actually. So in certain areas of the state, our parks may have to adhere to some fire bans or restrictions that may limit fire activity that otherwise are not, depending on the local determinations of fire danger. So Kristin talked about the local fire authorities being able to determine those. Our park managers rely heavily on the county, the fire departments, as well as the fire defense boards, ODF partners, BLM, and USFS partners to help us determine fire danger levels. And we try to be good partners and adhere to those restrictions as well. They can be anywhere between prohibiting any sort of outside loose fires to the manicured campground and determined campfire rings where folks can have fires, to just an all-out ban on any sort of open flame. And during the September wildfire activity, we determined that any kind of open flame was too dangerous with the winds that we were experiencing at that period. So we had issued, along with the governor's emergency order, that no open flame would be permitted in the state parks. And that unfortunately included some methods of cooking. So propane stoves are banned for a short period of time that maybe weren't quite the most popular of our restrictions that we had placed, but for the most part, the public was very understanding and everyone was very cooperative.
And with that, I think, with the different ranges of bans that are put on, how do visitors know what is actually, put on that state park that they're going to visit? How do they know that? And then what type of challenges do field staff have, or the rangers have, on enforcement at the park itself?
That's a really good question. I think part of communication is that we often adhere to these challenges when folks are used to coming back and being repeat customers in sort of a way of repeating experiences that they had. So campfires are such an integrated part of the experience of camping that when people make a reservation, it's almost expected that they get to have that same kind of experience and roast marshmallows or go to the beach and have a beach fire. When we are in these emergency situations and things change quickly, we try to communicate that in every possible way that we can come up with, whether it is blasting on social media, updating the park pages on the websites, emailing reservation holders with as much advance notice that we can get. At the same time, we know that a lot of those will be missed. So we try to bolster all of our communication efforts by making sure that on the ground and in the field, we have signage that repeats the same consistent messaging over and over again. While we know that this is unfortunately a damper on the experience for the park goer, first and foremost, always for Oregon Parks and Recreation, is that we put safety first for both of our campers, our visitors, and for our staff and volunteers. So when that happens, we just try to communicate it as much as we can, and enforcement can be a little bit of an issue. Not everybody wants to be eating cold chili out of a can. Maybe it gets to be a little bit difficult figuring out how to heat your food or figuring out alternative food sources. But at the end of the day, if we have a park rule that prioritizes safety, we're not doing it just to be a nuisance for the park experience, but we're doing it for a good reason, and that is to keep you safe. So our field staff is incredibly patient. They do a lot of wonderful work, and the reason that they do this is because of the positive experience they have with the visitors and the park goers, and a lot of that has continued to be positive, and we received a lot of support, so we thank the public for that.
Thanks. And I'd like to pass it over to Calum with Tourism Vancouver Island, just to explain to everyone who's watching, who are probably primarily from Oregon, what is the relationship like that Tourism Vancouver Island has with the Wildfires Service and Emergency Management British Columbia? How do you all work together?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. Got lots of friends in Oregon and Washington State, so kind of love the Oregon connection here and can't wait to get back down into Oregon. Also, as we always like to do, just want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the Shinnecock First Nation here in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, and encourage everyone tuning in tonight to reflect or do a little bit of research on the traditional territory that you might happen to be located on. I think I also just wanted to mention that for us, emergency management as a tourism organization is a fairly new thing. For a long time, we were focused almost entirely on promoting the island to guests and, smooth marketing campaigns. And over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, we've been shifting towards more of a management role. And I expect that that's probably quite similar across the US as well. And our fire seasons in 2017, 18, and 19 really underscored the need for us as a tourism association with kind of regional responsibility to be more engaged in emergency preparedness and also kind of active crisis management. So with that in mind, over the course of the last probably 2 years now, we've really been working to strengthen our relationship with Emergency Management BC. They are the province's lead coordinating agency when it comes to all emergency management related activities, whether planning, crisis response training, etc. And so with that, we really as an organization prioritized emergency management, engaged in a pretty significant training initiative to try to first of all get our teams up to speed. We realize there's a lot of acronyms and a pretty steep learning curve for folks who aren't familiar with the emergency management world. So we've just on a year-over-year basis been doing lots of site visits at our regional emergency management office, and we're slowly starting to become kind of integrated into the system and a part of the emergency management calls that take place on a regular basis, and also a part of kind of the crisis management side of things, and lots of smooth information sharing now. But it is a fairly new thing for us as an organization, and something that we know we need to prioritize moving forward, as the intensity and frequency of challenging fire seasons is very likely to increase.
And how do burn bans work on Vancouver Island? Who's making that decision?
Yeah, so burn ban decisions are made on a regional basis. So there might be a burn ban, for example, on Vancouver Island or a portion of Vancouver Island, or there could be a burn ban province-wide. It's all kind of dependent on the current conditions and expected conditions. I think generally speaking, we've had fire bans for the exception of this year, as many seasons as I can really remember. It's just become a pretty standard thing that most of the island, particularly the central and southern parts of Vancouver Island, will have campfire bans in place from kind of the end of June until sometime in mid-September. So it's something that, and that's the other side of it for us, is communicating that out to visitors to Vancouver Island, to our business stakeholders and our communities, so that somebody might have been enjoying time in the Okanagan region of BC, and they might be coming to Vancouver Island where there's a fire ban all of a sudden. So kind of that communication is really key, and us being in sync with the regional centers is pretty important in that regard.
Great, thank you. And with that, I mean, you say this is a pretty recent development for Tourism Vancouver Island, but what are some of the successes that you've had And what is the challenge that you guys have faced as well?
Yeah, so I think the initial challenge was having our team get up to speed on the whole emergency management world. As folks who were primarily focused on marketing and industry training and strategic planning, emergency management was something we didn't really spend a whole lot of time thinking about. And so I think the initial challenge was just getting up to speed and understanding what supports and services are available to us and our stakeholders, and then educating Emergency Management BC, the Wildfire Service, and other players what we do and how we can help, because it's definitely a two-way street. So I think some of the successes that we're seeing on a kind of an evolving basis is the shift. Lots of tourism business operators are moving towards having propane fire pits. They're a legal use during a fire ban, so long as they fit within certain restrictions. And lots of campgrounds that I've been talking to have been actually shifting, getting rid of their regular campfire pits and moving to these propane pits, just because the need for them is so regular. Whereas others, they pull them out when it's required and sometimes charge an additional fee for guests. So I think, shifting that expectation that somebody as a visitor to the island is entitled to a fire is, one success. Another challenge that was kind of unique to the island, we had a region called the fog zone. So it's within about, say, a mile of the shoreline on the west coast of the island, was basically free from any of the restrictions that might have been in place. So, you might have guests in one campsite that could technically fit within the fog zone, and guests on the other side of the park where it's out of the fog zone. Very hard for folks to understand the difference. And we've since gotten rid of the fog zone. So communicating that to folks has been a challenge for us as well. And I think one more success that I might share on our part is, as an organization, we undertook a big database initiative to try to understand where our businesses are actually operating. Our database previously was all their kind of like corporate mailing address, but we might be dealing with, a horseback guiding company that operates in a remote area. So if there is a emergency situation, we're now able to understand what businesses might have guests in what part of the island, and then we can kind of respond accordingly. So that's been a kind of unique innovation here in the province that we're really excited to be a part of.
Great, thanks for sharing. With that, I was going to ask Joe, have you guys talked about propane fire pits?
We have, and they're actually a rather popular item with our campgoers, especially as people want to deal less and less with the nuance of buying wood or making sure that their firewood is dry, etc. So we have been seeing a lot more of the propane fire pits, and always with campers, the propane stoves are incredibly popular. Unfortunately, when we go through those high winds and emergency fire bans, even the safest of the propane fire pits or stoves will also be banned. We did get some pushback for the stoves when the winds finally died down and things were seeming to stabilize as far as the weather front, and the fires were still of dangerous proportions. We had let park managers individually determine if the propane cook stoves were allowed within their parks for cooking purposes only. So unfortunately, the propane fire pits were still banned, but more and more as we're looking towards stabilization and relaxing of these measures, we like to make sure that those determinations were made at the park level by the park managers on a park by park basis. So because the propane campfires are a lot safer than the wood ones, we were able to let those be utilized before that we reinstalled the use of campfires in general.
Thanks. And I was going to pass it over to Chris to ask, as someone who's visiting Oregon, or even an Oregonian who's going to explore another part of the state, outside of the state park system, how do you know if there's a burn ban in place? Is there a website? Do you have to look on each public land manager site? Do you have to look at that specific forest? How do you figure that out?
Yeah, so restrictions and bans are going to be different depending on the agency or the landowner. And so you're looking at Forest Service, BLM, state parks, Department of Forestry, state lands. down to industrial lands and just private landowners in general. And so we've tried to simplify it within the Department of Forestry, and Keep Oregon Green connects to the Department of Forestry's fire restrictions map on their website. So at least for Oregon, that's as close to one-stop shopping as you're probably going to get. They don't do the work for other federal agencies. They will only do the work for theirs. So you'll find the detailed information for Oregon Department of Forestry protected lands. And then if you want to visit, the Deschutes National Forest or somewhere down on the, Siuslaw or whatever, you can click on the map and it won't show the restriction information, but at least it will provide you with a website and a phone number to call.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you recommend, what should people for next year really be doing to prepare and prevent future wildfires?
Right now, I would advise people to take the fall and the winter seasons to prepare your yard, harden your home for wildfire. We lost a lot of communities over that Labor Day holiday week. And I would advise people to go to firewise.org to learn more about creating defensible space around your home. I think for those of us living in the northwest corner of the state, or even in a city like Portland, we've felt immune to wildfire because we get so much rain up here. But I think this year really goes to show that we're facing a new reality. And so I would encourage people to go to our website, keeporegongreen.org, learn more about the various activities that commonly start wildfires. When your area enters into fire season and you're unsure about the use of open fires, whether in your backyard or if you're going camping, the following week, or if you're involved with spark emitting activities of some kind, check with your local fire authority or go to our website just to understand what's restricted and when. Because whether you're at home, whether you're out on the job, whether you're just out and about and recreating in Oregon, it's really important to predict the outcomes of any outdoor activity that you're engaged in that could possibly spark a fire. Because if you can visualize a fire igniting as a result of your actions and activities, it probably will. And so my motto is predictable is preventable, and then always have those fire tools on hand just in case.
Thank you. Well, we're about wrapping up on time, so I wanted to give each of the panelists kind of a closing statement, and I wanted to start with Joe. I think Joe is frozen. All right, Calum, you've heard a little bit about burn bans in Oregon and a little bit about what State Parks is doing and some of the challenges we face with authority by federal department or state or an independent agency. Any advice or any tidbits that you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think, obviously this was just a quick overview for me of how things work in Oregon, but my first feeling is that it does seem a little more confusing than the way that we approach things here. Fire bans on Vancouver Island apply to public and private lands. So it's really simple and straightforward. And when one's in place, you see it on, those overhead billboards, and it's kind of lit up and it's very obvious to folks. So that was kind of the one thing that came to mind. And and I think the other thing I just wanted to mention is that I think a key role for tourism organizations is to do that advocacy work and education with our tourism business owners, so that people who own private campgrounds or run guided trips are aware of the risk of fires and also of their responsibilities, and can kind of actively work to ensure their experiences can remain really remarkable and positive for guests, even if the fire ban's in place, because I think they're just going to become more frequent here on the island as we move forward. In closing, thank you so much for having me. And would love to kick around some other ideas around emergency management in the future with you all as well. So thank you.
That'd be great. Thank you, Calum. Joe, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm sorry, that was really funky.
It's okay. Calum and Joe have had some unstable internet, as we've all had over the past 6 months. So we get it. Joe, we're just doing closing statements. Do you want to share anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Just want to say thank you, everybody, for letting State Parks be involved in this conversation. Fighting wildfire is definitely not one of our priorities, one would think, but this year was definitely an eye-opening experience for us. We suffered almost 1,000 acres worth of damage, which then a whole picture of looking at over 1 million acres, it doesn't seem like very much, but it definitely inconvenienced a lot of campers. We handled a lot of emergency evacuations and had a lot of tree falling and debris falling that we had to deal with along with everybody else, and looking towards a long road of recovery up ahead. So none of this would be possible without the hard work of our staff and volunteers and partners. So we're very excited to move forward, and at the same time understanding and knowing that this is only the beginning of the conversation and that we'll be talking about fires for a long time to come. So please keep us in mind as we move forward. And as far as we're looking ahead to winter time and recreation that involves zero fires, we're very excited.
And Kristin, we started with you and we'll close with you. Any final statements?
Thanks to the partners joining on the call today, and thank you, and thanks to Travel Oregon for hosting this. I thought it was great, and maybe I'll just reiterate what I said at the outset. 70% of Oregon's fires are started by people, and so that means that the power and responsibility of the majority of the wildfires in the state are squarely in our hands. And as our population continues to grow, and as we have been witnessing wildfires increase in frequency, in intensity, and cost, I would think that Keep Oregon Green's message is probably more important than ever. So thanks again for allowing me to be a part of the conversation tonight. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much, Kristin, Joe, and Calum. I'll hand it over to you, Eileen.
Great. Thanks so much, Sara. We really appreciate all of you joining us tonight and being involved in this great discussion. Special thanks to Sara from Travel Oregon for moderating the discussion, and again for all of our guests for joining us as well. And Chris didn't get a chance to mention it, but I do know that Bear Lake Brewing just released a fundraising beer for Keep Oregon Green. So you can visit the Bear Lake Brewing website to find out more about that. So typical Oregon, a beer as a fundraiser. And speaking of fundraisers, tonight has been a fundraiser for the Choosh Fund. You can find out more information about them on the Summit website. And if you are so motivated, you can make a donation to support them and the other beneficiaries of the Thirsty Thursday Film Night series by visiting the Summit website registration page and choosing Film Nights Only donation.